Hey folks, Amanda here. Just a quick heads up that from time to time, the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast does include some adult language. So if you've got kids with you, you may just want to hold on to this episode to listen to a little later. Enjoy! Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, your host for this show and the creator of the Surviving to Thriving movement. Each week, we'll dive into the mindsets that keep us in survival mode and learn how to get on the path to a truly thriving life. If you're looking for a wake-up call and want some valuable tools to get there, you have come to the right place. After all, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. Now, let's head over to the show. Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. I am your guest host, Amanda Solman, and this week we have a little bit of a special treat for you. So I am giving Mark the week off so that I can talk with Sonya Stattman, who is a coach, speaker, and success strategist, passionate about working with women in business. So Sonya, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Now, Sonya, when you and I connected here probably a few weeks ago, I'm not going to lie, I was actually pretty excited because you have a little different story and a little different business than a lot of the folks that we talk to. So I guess, some of my excitement was just, that you focus on women in business, and I just happen to be one of those. So that, that part in and of itself is nice. I guess the other part that I'm excited for our conversation, and this is some things that maybe you and I talked about a little bit as we were kind of going back and forth about the background of what we were going to talk about, is that, a lot of the business that we do, a lot of our clients, they work in the agriculture industry. And this is a space that historically has been pretty male dominated, especially in leadership roles. And I would guess, even if you would talk to our clients today, a lot of them are likely to have bosses or customers who probably look more like their dad and their grandpa than they do look like their mom or their sister. And so, suffice it to say, I think I'm just, really excited to hear some of your insights and your perspective on what it takes to really achieve success as a woman in business. So I guess kind of that setup out of the way, let's kick this off. Really, I was just kind of hoping that you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, awesome. Look, as far as sort of my education and business career started, it was about 20 years ago. Like, I ended up going to university and did advertising and marketing and copywriting. I thought I was really into psychology, and I didn't want to be a psychologist. And I thought I was just really fascinated by the business arena, right? The business industry and what that looked like and how the psychology affected everything. So that was kind of what I dove into and really was excited to understand. And I started off in a big advertising agency, learned a lot about branding. It was amazing. Like, we did 4 years worth of work in 10 months, won a ton of awards. It was a completely male dominated industry. There was so much sexism. We always talked about how we lived in the dungeon. We lived in this really deep hole in the middle of the advertising agency. And we were just, it was like living in a dungeon. And so we quickly, after the first year, basically broke off, me and my art director partner, who's also a woman, and we broke off and started our own advertising agency. And that was our dive into entrepreneurship. And it was a really interesting dive because, it's one thing to say, this was back, 20 years ago, there was not near as much support or inspiration, or it was kind of like, okay, we don't have a clue what we're doing in operating a business. We're really, really good at our craft though. So, it was kind of trial by fire. And, it was a really interesting journey. And we focused on sort of looking at male-dominated industries and teaching them how to market to women. Because, back then it was just becoming really, I think the world was becoming very aware of the power of women, our purchasing power, how many decisions we made in the home, and so men were still very much marketing to women really not to women at all. They were still marketing to men. And so we were going into sort of these male dominated industries and teaching them, this is how you're going to have to talk to women. This is how you're going to have to, connect with them, because it's a very different ballgame. So yeah, that was really an interesting place to be. And there was just so much sexism, so much interesting things that happened during that time period. We of course worked with a lot of men. We were often called girls and taken advantage of. People were trying to always get our pricing down. It was just this really kind of, interesting thing. And what I found is that I was really passionate and loved the professional development part, the business development part of the agency. And I ended up deciding to be a coach. So that was about 12 years ago. And I've been coaching ever since. And it's taken on different, evolutions, different developments. But my focus was always on helping women to really see their value, helping women to understand how to operate in the business world a lot more effectively as themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I've been doing. In 2008, I opened up a co-working and wellness center in Austin, Texas. And that was amazing. And my business partner is still running it now. And yeah, I've just been doing this journey for a long time. I've worked with a lot of women during that time.
Awesome. Now you mentioned, being in Austin previously, but Austin is not where you are at today. And so I know this doesn't actually have anything to do maybe it does, I don't know, with your business, but I'm just curious, you're not in Austin today. Tell us a little bit about where you are.
Yeah, look, I'm in Melbourne, Australia now, which is amazing. Australia is a beautiful country. And look, it's a very beautiful love story, actually. I met my husband on eHarmony, of all things. And he was Australian and I was in Austin. And we quickly fell in love, had this sort of whirlwind romance. I had an 8-year-old at the time. He had an 8-year-old at the time. My daughter, I had full custody of. And so we just sort of picked up and moved to Australia. And now we've got a toddler and 2 teens.
Just proof you never know where life's going to take you, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's amazing. It's interesting and lovely to have had that much experience. I've worked with people all over the world, but to be enriched in a new culture. I mean, you think I had the illusion that Australia was the same, right? I mean, it's the, first world country. It's, very stabilized. It's English speaking, there's a lot of modernization. It's going to be similar, but it's very different. And when you start to immerse yourself in another culture, even when you think it's similar, you start to pick up on a lot of subtle things that happen. And especially working more intimately with people, you start to recognize, wow, there's quite a lot of cultural things that are going on.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Australia continues to be on my bucket list of places that I would love to visit someday.
Oh, you should. It's really, really beautiful. And I particularly love Melbourne. Melbourne is my favorite city in Australia. It's just this, and I think it's still one of the top 3 most livable cities in the world. And it's gorgeous. It's just really beautiful. And everything lives close to beaches, because there's not really much in the middle of Australia. Mm-hmm. It's so desert oriented. But yeah, it's a gorgeous country and very stabilized, and people are lovely. And cool. I'd highly recommend.
Awesome. Well, your endorsement helped move it up a couple of spots. So. Awesome. Well, let's jump back kind of to the topic of the day. So I know you mentioned, right, you were interested in the psychology and the professional development side of working in the branding advertising business. And I'm just curious, what was the thing that made you say, all right, I'm ready to go out on my own and do this coaching thing, really kind of break away and kind of stand on your own 2 feet in kind of a separate space to some extent, right? I mean, there's a lot of professional development, personal development, psychology, insight into behaviors in advertising and branding. But kind of, I also made the switch from the advertising world over to the personal development and coaching world. And so I'm curious, what kind of pushed you over to the edge to make that decision?
Look, I think it's something that was always in me. Like I pretty much was a coach from birth, like some people are just like that. Like, I mean, I remember being a child and just attracting people who would just like completely spill out their whole stories and their life. And it's just always been what I've drawn and what I've connected with. And I think I went into advertising because I thought it was a more stable business, a stable kind of career. That's sort of like why I went in that direction. And I love the creativity of it, right? I'm very creative, love the creativity of it. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. But really, I think the biggest catalyst for me was that I had a major thing happen in my life. Like at the time I was married, I was running my business. I had a very young child. She was like under 2. And, I sort of had this idea of the perfect life, right? Like I've got my house, I've got my husband, I've got my kids, I've got my, business, and I'm living the freedom, I'm living the amazing life. And it was really an illusion. Like there was a lot of things that were misaligned in my life at that time. And my first husband started doing pretty hard drugs. And I wasn't, I was just really naive, and I really didn't understand what was going on. And so very quickly, a lot happened in my life. And within sort of 2 weeks, everything fell apart.
Oh, wow.
So, I had to leave my house. I eventually had to file bankruptcy, divorce, become a single parent. Yeah. And so a lot of sort of things happened. And what it did was really allow me to introspect and look at myself and say, okay, what had I created? Like, what did I really want? And basically I got to start over. So even though it was this really challenging time, really tragic, really hard, it gave me this ability of freedom to really determine, what do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to take it? And so for me, it was a very easy choice to decide, well, I want to coach people, and particularly women in business, because I have a passion for supporting women and women, being able to empower themselves. And I think the business arena is a tough one for us. And so, and no one's really teaching women how to operate in it as themselves. There's still a lot of even masculine teaching around how to operate in business. So that was really sort of my mission. And I just went out and started doing that. And the advertising and marketing background is fantastic, right? It gives me so much insight into how to help them in those areas. But I also have done a ton of self-development in myself, and that allows me to help them with the mindset and the internal things that we hit and the emotional stuff. And that's sort of my favorite things to work with.
Yeah, there's so much in what you talk about that aligns with a lot of what we work on, and especially around the mindset piece, right? And maybe that's just something across coaches that you just see show up a lot. But that idea that, you could teach the skill set, right? You could teach them marketing, you could teach them advertising, but if they don't have the mindset to really, have that resiliency or to really be able to work through the challenges, the skills mean basically nothing. So it's so important.
It's so important. And I think that's what's missing when you've got a lot of things that are kind of online programs, or there's not someone helping like really shift and be able to see things. Like you would recognize this. Like so many of my clients, it's that I can see something that they can't see, that I can see where they're doing a pattern. That's that sabotage, or that's that mindset issue. And so I'm able to say, hey, that right there, that's what we need to address, right? Yeah. Where they could ignore it for years and years if they're trying to do it on their own, or if they don't have someone who can really see, unconsciously what's operating.
Or even the other side of it is, even if they know, it's a challenge, not knowing what to do with it. So I just deal with it because I don't know how to fix it. So
yes. Totally.
So good. So let's dive into working with women specifically. So as you've worked with your clients, what are some unique challenges that you think women in business face that maybe, some of our male colleagues don't deal with, or maybe deal with to a little bit lesser extent?
Look, I think there's kind of two areas we have to look at, right, to split it up. So one is women are different. We have a different operating system. So like there's a whole heap of things that we're going to operate differently, feel differently. And of course we're all on the spectrum, right? Like we all have masculine, feminine traits, so it's not like, we do things that men don't do completely, but we have a different operating system. We think differently. We feel differently. We've got emotional states. We have cycles. We have, there's a whole sort of internal operating system that's very different from men. And so what happens is what I see is a lot of women who get into business or get into careers and they're trying to push like men, right? They're trying to operate like men. And what happens is they get really burnt out. They get really exhausted. They get tired of everything. Nothing means anything anymore. And part of that is because we really operate differently. And so, I've worked with men and women through the years, and I've just found that, they just work differently. They have goals differently. They accomplish goals differently. They have different whys. There's just a whole sort of different way that we function. And they're both really valuable and really amazing in business. But what happens is that women's traits, that our operating system is not valued in business in general. So I think that is a huge thing that we face when we're operating in the business world, is that, it's like it's not even valued or recognized. So we're recognized when we act more like a man, but we're not recognized and we're devalued when we act more like a woman. And I think this is a huge piece. And then, of course, on the other side of it, there's the things we have to face, it just being a male-dominated world. Like, it's harder to get to the top. There's a lot of sexism. There's a lot of privilege. Like, I think, we've all got privilege in some ways, right? So I think, men don't always recognize the privilege that they have, that they don't have to work as hard, that they don't have to try to make themselves, seen. I mean, I've heard, oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how many stories I've heard over the years, right? Like, so, there was one woman I talked to and she was like, well, men can talk over me 4 times. I have to let them talk over me 4 times before I'm allowed to say anything.
Oh, wow.
If I say anything in the first 4 times, then I'm reprimanded. But, once 4 people talk over me, then I'm allowed to say that, hey, can you please stop talking over me? And this is like one of thousands of stories I've heard. So, there's a lot of these subtle things that are going on that most women are not taught to handle. A lot of times we just shove it under the rug, like it's just what we have to deal with. It's just how it is. And we're not really taught, how do we stand in our power as women?
I guess I would take your insights or your perspective on, as a piece of that, women supporting other women, right? And so there's one piece, right, that there are a lot of men in leadership positions, especially in a lot of industries like the one we work in. But there's also this element of, how do we get more women in leadership so that, we can support each other, but also kind of overcoming some old mindsets about women in competition. I, as an example, and some of the folks listening to this may have heard some of these stories float through social media over the past couple of years. But, for instance, in our industry, we'll have, young female sales reps who are calling on their male customers out on the farm, and they'll ride in combines with them, which is something male salesmen do, female salesmen do. Like, it's just something they do because they jump in the combine, have a conversation while harvest or whatever's going on. But there have been instances where, someone's wife has gotten upset that this young 20-something female is out riding in the combine with their husband. And I'm not saying that happens all the time. Like, I don't want to paint with too broad of strokes, but there are some of these old mindsets about women competing with each other. And so I guess, what are some of your thoughts on how women can be more effective in supporting each other? And so it's not just about the men in leadership, it's also about women in leadership and at kind of parallel levels with us.
Absolutely. It is so much. And it's funny because, just even over the last few weeks, I've talked to some women who are like, the worst bosses I had were women. And so there is a lot of competition. And I just did a podcast on competition because I think that we have to look at what is it that creates competition among women. And how do we shift that, right? Because it's an internal thing, right? And we've all felt it, right? We've all felt that jealousy, competition, it's a human nature kind of thing. And so, what do we do when we have it? How do we handle it? And how can we sort of take care of it in ourselves so we make sure that we're pulling everyone up, right? And I think, one of the things that I've learned over the years is that when we're operating in our power, when we're operating in ourself, when we're in what I call our lane, we feel no competition. But when we're operating outside of that lane, when we're trying to do something that's not really a good fit for us, when we're trying to be someone that we're not, that's when we get competitive. And so it's this really interesting switch of being able to recognize, and I do this in myself as well. If I start to feel those feelings, I'm like, okay, well, where am I operating outside of my genius? Where am I trying to do something that's not really my thing? Because when I'm in my thing, I'm totally comfortable. I'm in my power. I don't feel like I'm, in competition with anybody. I'm just me, right? I'm just operating in my gifts. And so I think that's one piece. And what happens is a lot of women at the top, especially in male dominated industries, they feel forced to act masculine, right? Because that's what's appreciated, that's what's leveraged, that's what's, pulled up into higher positions. And because of that, I think it takes on this thing where it's not really us. And then, we started to create all this competitiveness. So, that harshness that sometimes you see in women bosses at the top, I think it's because they're operating in something that's not good for them. This is, that's just what I've seen over the years. So I think, we've all got to sort of be conscious of ourselves, and what's happening with us, because I think it's very natural for us as women to support each other, right? I think that's our natural state. Mm-hmm. We want to support each other. We want to be a tribe. We want to connect with people. But if we aren't valuing who we are, then it's a challenge, I think, sometimes to let go of that competition. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. Totally. What's interesting to me is there have been some organizations that I've run into over the years where there's almost this feeling from, women who are currently in leadership positions or farther along in their careers, where it sometimes feels like I had to struggle to get to where I am today. And so therefore you should have to figure it out too. And that's always an interesting mindset to me, because I think there are opportunities for us to say, I struggled, but here's where I have identified a way for us to make this better, so that it doesn't, why do we need to start yet another generation of struggle when we have the opportunity to value the characteristics that women bring to an organization, to value the importance of family, to value all of these things that actually are really good for everybody in the organization, not just women.
Absolutely. I think that's so true.
So interesting. I guess I always find that I feel like I was very, very blessed to start my career. I only reported to women for probably, I was at the agency for about 5 years, and I reported directly to women for pretty much the entire time of that, and was very fortunate to have women who actually really cared about building up other women in the agency. And so that is something I will be forever grateful for. And it's so interesting because I had two main managers, and they were both very different in their style. They were very, very different people. But the idea of really building up other strong, driven women was something that was very important to both of them. And so I think that's so something to appreciate. And I hope that over time, other women in leadership positions can recognize that they have that ability to influence the next generation of professional women, and that it doesn't have to be as hard as maybe we think it needs to be.
Yeah, look, I agree. And I think we have to come at it from two areas, obviously, right? We have to come at it internally, where we have all the power, to really make sure, are we doing what we can to support women? Are we handling our own stuff so that we don't feel threatened, and we're really, wanting to pull everyone up? And then I think we have to handle the systemic issues in society, because, there's a lot. And so being able to sort of tackle those things as well, they're both really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as I was kind of doing some digging through your website ahead of time, and I was kind of looking through and learning more about you, one of the programs that I noticed that you lead is one that you call Women in the Arena. And it just piqued my interest. And I'm curious, what do you mean by the arena?
Well, if you look at it in terms of the arena is like this battleground, right? It's like this place that you go into, like the traditional arena, the Italian arenas, or you go in this place sort of a battle. And I feel like because we are pretty much the underdog as women, when we enter into the business arena, it is kind of like arena, and we have to understand our opponents. We have to understand what we're facing. And it's not about setting it up as a battle per se, but it really is about recognizing that there's some challenges that we need to know how to face. And so my program is really about helping people get into that arena and be very confident and skilled and their mindset right, and like have the things that they need in order to be able to operate more effectively. So that's kind of what I mean by the arena. And there's some good, do you know Brene Brown?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I love Brene Brown. She uses the arena as well. And she talks about how, you know, vulnerability is like being in the arena. Right. And she has this quote that is something like, if you're not also in the arena with me getting your ass kicked, like I'm not really interested in your opinion. And that's what I feel is like a lot of women, we need the support of each other in the arena, because, you know, those people who are not in the arena, they don't understand. They don't have the same level of awareness that we have of what we're facing, what we're dealing with. And especially if you're operating your own business, like it's a totally different realm. And so oftentimes you'll have people that might criticize you or tell you to do something different or whatever, but they don't understand what you're facing. And so I think it's for me, it felt really cool to create something that allows people to feel like they're effectively navigating this thing called the business arena.
Nice. I think some of those comments you were just making about, you know, having other women who understand what you're going through is a really good segue into my next question. And so one of the challenges that I think many women in our industry face is that a lot of us live in very rural communities. So we don't live in New York City or LA or wherever where you can just, you know, meet up with your girls after work and powwow over a glass of wine. Like we don't have that really large network of other professional women that we can just easily reach out to. You know, I recently actually joined a mastermind group where it was specifically for that purpose. It's other professional women in agriculture. But we live out in, you know, a lot of us live out in the boonies. And so like we have to create these opportunities to really create that community. And so I'm curious, throughout some of your work, you know, have you found some unique ways to build that sense of community amongst women, you know, even if they aren't all together all the time?
Look, I actually think it's even more, I mean, it's so possible to do that nowadays. Like it really is such a connected world. You know, I spend a lot of time on the internet. I spend a lot of time connecting with people, and not just like, you know, hashtag this and this is what I'm doing, but actually connecting with people, you know, having conversations on Zoom or Skype, or, you know, or having conversations in Messenger, or I've met, and I've joined a lot of Facebook groups as a good example. You know, finding the right Facebook group is the key. You know, there's the Facebook groups that are quite promoty and salesy, and there's the Facebook groups that are too big and they're bitchy. You know, you got to kind of find the right Facebook groups, but you can find smaller communities that are more deliberate and they're more just other women who want to connect, or start your own. It's so easy. And finding people in your industry is great. Sometimes finding people outside your industry is great, because it gives you a different perspective and some, you know, influences that you don't get within the industry. But I think, you know, it's really doable to reach out and be connected these days everywhere. And I think the piece is to actually take the time to connect, you know, reach out to people that you find really interesting and say, hey, would you be open for a conversation? And it can be virtual. It doesn't have to be in person. I mean, I probably spend more time now connecting with people online than I do in person. I still have an office that I go to a few days a week, and I have a co-working space. I'm in a big city, but you know, I have just as cherished relationships with people I've never met in person.
Yep, absolutely. That was one of the gals who's in my mastermind my mastermind group. I was doing some coaching with her, and it was funny because when we met at the mastermind retreat, finally, I'd been doing coaching with her for probably 9-10 months, but we had never actually met in person. So I was like, oh, you are that tall, or, oh, that's, you know, like whatever, you know, when you finally meet somebody in person. So for sure, I definitely think some of those relationships absolutely can be created in a virtual setting. Awesome. Very good. So as I've talked with a lot of women, and, you know, personally, like I'm married, but don't have kids. But I know a lot of people my age, you know, they're starting families, and there's constantly this, you know, this push and pull of, I really love my career. I'm really invested in that, but I also love my family and I want to make sure I'm giving them the attention that they need. And I think this is a struggle that women will have faced and will continue to face. And I'm just curious, as you work with your clients and as you've, run into people in different situations, what are some of the things that you coach people through on that kind of constant juggle? Yeah, juggle's a good word.
Yeah, look, I think, I work with this a ton, right? I mean, I was a single parent running 2 businesses. Now I'm a parent of a teen and a toddler running a business. Like it's always a juggle, right? Like, I don't think it's an illusion for people who say they have it all together. Like I would really, really be surprised if that's ever true. So, you are juggling those things. I think for one, women need to embrace their ambition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love my work. I love my business. I can never not be in business. I can never be a stay-at-home mom. It would never work for me. And I love my kids. I love my family. So, I think sometimes women have a lot of guilt about that and they feel like it's not okay to be like that. And I want to say, first of all, that yes, embrace it. Like, it's amazing. Find people like you and who you can surround yourself with that are also like that. Like, I've had people that are my closest friends who are the same. They have the ambition because they love their work and they also love their family. And we don't shame each other and make it wrong. Like, we totally support each other. Yes, do both. Yes, find the way to do that. So I think, that's one thing, is just even the mindset that it's okay. We give ourselves permission. Like, it's amazing. Like, do it, because we're impacting the world and we're impacting our kids. Like, both my kids are already so entrepreneurial minded.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they get it, they want to create. It's like, it's done so much influence for them in good ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a piece. I mean, for me, I'm big on simplifying. So a lot of the people that come to me, and actually the women that I'm working with, it's because they have very complicated businesses. They're overwhelmed. They're exhausted. They're trying to balance it all and it's just not happening. So I go in very quickly and streamline the business. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure you have, you're really, really focused. So I work primarily with service businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes service businesses have multiple target markets. They have multiple products. They have multiple avenues they're selling on. Like, there's all these things. So I streamline them down to literally one target market, one service, one pricing, one sales system. So that, like, literally they have one thing that they're focusing on. And what happens is they free up 80% of their time doing that. They don't even realize how much time they were sort of all over the place. And then they have more time for family. So that's a really good balance. And then when they feel really stabilized and they feel like they're ready to grow and they're ready to add some more stuff on, well, then they could open up to a different target market or another product or another, depends. But I think that's really important. You have to simplify. I think a lot of people, and one of the other things I see is a lot of people are, they don't know really what they're doing. They haven't gotten coaching or support or a mentor, someone who can basically say, look, this is what's the best sort of avenue for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so since they don't really know what they're doing, they're trying everything.
Yeah.
And it's too much. It's so overwhelming. I mean, social media, the different marketing channels, I mean, there's millions. And it's just trying to do all those techniques and all those strategies. You're never going to master one. Like, you're never going to get anywhere with them. So, it's so much better to have that focus until you're really, really stabilized and you're really creating a lot of income. And then you can, sort of move on.
And I think too, a lot of those principles still apply if you are working for someone else, right? So if you're not in the entrepreneurial space, I think often, we assume that we have to do everything all the time, or we have to do everything that everyone around us is asking for. And what I actually find is that the really effective leaders figure out which activities actually have the most impact, and then we weed out all of the rest, right? We work with a lot of companies who are, still figuring out, where really is my return from certain customers, or what segment of the business is really where the growth potential is. And if you're a leader, and I don't care if you're male or female, if you are a leader who can figure out which sections of your business are really the most impactful, that is going to serve you in the long run a lot better than trying to be everything to everyone all the time.
Oh my gosh, definitely. And one of the things I think that that is sort of, especially on the feminine side, the woman side, is that a lot of women struggle with setting boundaries, right? And they struggle with really valuing their opinion and what they see, and voicing it. And I think that's the piece. A lot of the women I worked with in corporate or in different careers, who are working for someone else, a lot of their issue isn't quite the same, right? Because they're not operating a business in the same way.
Right.
But their mindset stuff and their internal stuff, it's so much about being able to really step into their power, have a clear voice, setting boundaries, and like, that's it. Like, these are my boundaries, and I don't care what you say. I'm not going to go beyond them. So a lot of that's learning to, I think, step into some of that. And that really shifts the power dynamics in a business place.
Absolutely. I've had so many conversations lately, and these conversations tend to come up more with some of our really early career female young professionals that we work with, our clients, about this idea of managing expectations and managing up, managing sideways. And in order to basically protect your time and protect your, not get taken advantage of, right? Because it's, I was talking to someone the other day, and they're like, well, I get a request for this thing, and they say it has to be done right this minute. So I feel like now I have to drop the thing that I was supposed to be doing to deliver on this thing that this other person asked for. And so how do you create guidelines? How do you set expectations? How do you manage expectations? Then how do you stick to the rules you set? Like, there's a lot of moving pieces, especially, we work with a lot of folks who do work in the corporate setting. And so, there's a lot of requests and a lot of demands coming from a lot of different directions, just by the nature of what our companies look like these days. And so I think, setting boundaries, setting expectations, like, it is such an important skill. And that's one of those skills I cannot be more grateful for the manager I had probably the first 3 years out of college, because that was something she hounded on, is setting expectations, not just with your coworkers, but also with your clients, in terms of, you don't get to ask for this extra thing and then just assume that the budget stays the same, right? Like, that's not how things go. And so I think that's definitely a skill if we can teach especially young women. I keep saying to them on coaching calls, if you can learn this one skill about managing expectations, it will take you a very long way.
Yeah. Oh, looks so true. And I think, and I want to just sort of highlight what you said too, like the skill, like, it's a skill. So it's not something anyone's going to come into life being amazing at.
Right.
It's a skill that you build. And even now, like, I've been practicing that skill very deliberately for a long time, and I don't know that I'll ever master it, right? There always is that next level of learning and that next level of skill building. And I think that's, being kind and patient with yourself as well, when you recognize, yep, I fluffed that up. Like, that didn't work. And so, but trying again and recognizing that it's really a skill building.
Absolutely. Well, and two, it's related, at least where it's showing up in some places for our clients. I'd be curious how it shows up with some of yours is, I think women often feel that any sort of pushback is conflict. And therefore I want to, I like to keep people happy. The number of 20-something women who are self-identified perfectionists, people pleasers, and conflict is in direct conflict with perfectionism and people pleasing. And so talking about how, actually, if you can push back a little bit in order to set some realistic expectations, it's actually going to protect you from a lot of conflict down the road. And I don't know how that necessarily shows up more in the entrepreneurial space or anything like that, but I think that's been a big theme that's come up for us too, is like, managing expectations is actually a way to get out of the conflict later if you can do it.
I think it's a communication thing, right? Like, it's that the skill is really being able to communicate effectively, communicate expectations, communicate when boundaries have been passed, communicate when something, isn't working, communicate when you messed up. Like, it's all sort of this, like, how do you gracefully communicate? And it's really, really important. I think we have to redefine, I get the same thing. So just to relate it completely, like, so many women in my life and that I've worked with and over the years, they don't want to rock the boat. And I think we have to shift that whole mindset. Like, that's impossible. It's impossible that you're not going to rock the boat. In fact, the more you're standing in your leadership, the more boats you're going to rock.
Yeah.
And I think it's just starting to really recognize that is important, actually, that you're going to be so much happier and more fulfilled when you're rocking those boats, if necessary, not unnecessarily. It's not just to make conflict, but when there is already a conflict there. So whether you're dealing with the conflict or not, the conflict is already there. So you can pretend to ignore it, but it's under the surface. So, you're so much better just addressing it in a graceful way in that moment and handling it as best you can and dealing with it head on so that it doesn't become this mountain instead of a molehill, then just trying to sweep it under the rug and pretend like there's no conflict. The conflict is already there. And so I think some of this is redefining the way we see it and the fear we have around it in addressing that. Because when we stand up to the people in our lives, it feels so good. It does. It feels amazing. And we were like, oh yes, this is what it's about.
Yeah. Oh, it was worth all of that scary stuff because it's pretty good on the back end. Right. Exactly. Well, and what you said about, redefining, one of the things that like I've personally experienced, and I think some of our clients are experiencing over time, is that, I think often women develop this need for perfectionism, this need to people please, because actually, fairly early in life, right, it serves us, right? Like, so if you're, for me personally, right, like I was a really good student, both in high school and in college, because, I always sought for perfection. I got good grades. My teachers liked me. Like, things came easy because I always strived for whatever that top tier was. And I remember and it not necessarily that it was one experience, but shifting into the professional world where all of a sudden this thing that had served me for so long and had been such a benefit, now I'm in a different setting where all of a sudden this perfectionism is causing this level of self-doubt that I had never experienced before, because now all of a sudden things are harder and I still have this perfectionism, this need to people please. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, how is this thing that was so good for so long, now all of a sudden it's not so good anymore? And it's like, mid-20s, late 20s, where you're like, oh crap, now what do I do?
Totally.
And making a shift.
Yeah, look, and I experienced the same exact thing. I was a really good girl until my teenage years, and then I went off the rails a bit. And then I was a good girl again. And then I was like in college, and I was like getting all A's and working full time and like getting 2 hours sleep a night. And because I was that perfectionist. I was like, I was going to get the 4.0. I was going to be amazing. I was going to do it all, like burn myself out. I mean, I think, and I also made that shift because it just didn't matter once I got into a career, like all that striving, because there's no way to be perfect in a career. There's no way to be, and as a woman, it's really hard as well, because no matter what you do, it's never going to kind of be enough. So I think, it is about switching. And that's another thing, sort of Brene Brown, I love some of her quotes. Like she has some great stuff, but she talks about how she's a recovering perfectionist and working on being a good enoughist, and I think
that phrase.
Me too, right? Because I think that's what all of us have to strive for, is that in like this is good enough. Like this is good. This is fulfilling for me. This is about what makes me happy and what makes me fulfilled, instead of striving for what the world thinks we should be doing, or what the world thinks is success, or what their levels of qualifications are. And this is what I find a lot with women, is that it's interesting when I'm working with them on their sort of initial vision and goals, because women are not always motivated by the same things men are, and so when you really get down to some of their motivation, they're not always as ambitious. They don't, some of the ideas of success that the world has, when like they might tell me them originally, and then I'm like, okay, well, what does that really mean to you? And as I dig in, they don't actually have those goals. They have like, I want to be fulfilled. I want to be happy. I want to feel like I'm free. Okay, great. Well, let's look at that, because sometimes the goals we shoot for, we think will provide freedom, but actually they end up trapping us.
Interesting. That's a really interesting thought. I like that. I'll have to ponder on that one a little bit more. Especially, maybe coming from, the world of advertising and marketing, like you and I both did. And it probably shows up in other industries too, is that so much of what is qualified as good is very subjective, right? And, I always said working in advertising was one of the hardest jobs I ever had, because everything was subjective. Like one client could love it, another client could hate it. Like it was so subjective. And so if you're coming into it and insert any number of industries and jobs, because I'm sure, with the exception of things like, medicine or engineering, where like there is actually like a perfect that needs to be hit to some extent, you know, coming into it with a perfectionist mindset or a need to people please is actually a lot of times, keeping you from the really good stuff, because the really good stuff comes on the edge of taking a little bit of a risk. I think that was, big learning for me.
Yeah, look, and that's the thing. I mean, if you want to succeed in business, you really have to be comfortable with the unknown, right? The biggest people take massive risks. I've taken massive risks. Like and sometimes sometimes you lose them. Sometimes that you fail, like, and that's okay. That's part of the culture we have to shift as well. Like failure, I've learned so much more from my failures than I've ever learned from my successes. Right. I mean, like failure is this beautiful thing that teaches us so much stuff. And then we get back up and then we try again. And that resilience that we build and that learning that we had, I mean, that's what we have to keep striving for, because it's just the perfectionism thing. It is a huge hindering. I mean, I see that all the time. So many women aren't succeeding because they're struggling with trying to have a certain things perfect, which is usually their image or their branding or their website, or, these things that actually don't even really matter for their income.
Well, and it's so interesting, and you probably do have a much better perspective on this, but I guess one of the things that I always think about, just kind of, looking at my rise from perfectionist to recovering perfectionist, and that of many of my friends is, how do we continue to raise the next generation to be more comfortable with experiencing failure in a safe space? And again, I say you probably have a much better perspective because you are a parent and I am not. But that's something I always think about is, if we want women to take more risks, if we want women to be more comfortable with the unknown, often that starts very early in making failure safe, instead of, expecting girls to be, perfect and, whatever the old standards for little girls are. But
yeah. And look, I think the most important thing is we need a lot more conversations about these things, right? So like I deliberately started my podcast to talk about the things that people aren't talking about, the competition, the ambition, the feelings of failure, what happens when we experience these emotions and these feelings that no one is talking about, because in the world of social media, for instance, everything is whitewashed, right? Everything is like, it's so great to own a business, it's amazing being a woman, blah, blah, blah. But like no one's dealing with the real stuff that's going on and the real things that we're facing. And this is one of the things like I kind of addressed in my TEDx talk as well, is that, we hype people up, right? We hype girls up. We're like, you can do anything, you can do anything. And then they smash into a glass ceiling that they have no idea how to work through, because we've never given them the skills to do it.
Yeah.
So, like as a parent, as a woman, even in like, I'm in my 40s, even with 40-year-olds, there's still so many people not having these conversations. So I think a lot of it is about getting really real and honest about what we face, what skills we need to learn, that failure is okay, that all of these, like we've got to get comfortable with it first. Yep. And then we've got to be able to teach that to our children. I know my teenager, like, she's a teenager, so she goes through her own things, it's challenging. But, I've brought her up from the very beginning of her life to be emotionally intelligent, to recognize that there's no black and white, that it's gray, and that we have to feel and that we have to trust ourselves, because women are so powerful intuitively, but oftentimes we mistrust ourselves, which is like, to me, the most important skill that we have to learn is fully trusting our gut and our inner intuition.
That's so good. That's good. I love it. So, bringing up the TEDx talk, that's a perfect transition. Tell me a little, what is the experience of giving a TEDx talk? I've seen so many of them on the internet, and now I actually get to talk to someone who's done it.
Yeah, look, it's such a different, it was much harder than I expected. Like I'm a pretty good public speaker. I've got a podcast, like, like I'm very comfortable in, talking normally, but in most of my public speaking, I don't plan a lot, right? Like I just sort of rock up and, start talking about what I know about.
Yep.
But I think a TEDx talk or a TED talk, they're very different. Like they're very structured. They have a flow to them. They're timed. And so and you have a platform that's so well respected.
Yeah.
So in that there's definitely a lot more pressure. There's a lot more, yeah, you have to memorize it. Like you can't have notes or script or anything with you. So yeah, look, I really was passionate about having this as another, because I'm just really clear about my mission and passion and what I'm doing. And so this is just another sort of asset or way to get my message out. And so for me, I worked pretty hard. Like I spent about 4 months.
Oh, wow.
I probably redid my script 100 times. I probably actually practiced it 300 times. I would lay in bed with my little one and putting her to bed, and I'd be like rehearsing in my head while I'm laying in bed with her. So I think it was amazing, experience, because it really, again, reinforced a belief I already have, which is practice is really important. Skill building is really important. And I did that over the course of those 4 months. Like I really, revised and felt into it and gave myself the space to, really explore what it would look like. And, the talk I had at the beginning is like 1,000 times different than the talk I had at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that's the beauty of it. I'd highly recommend it. It's an amazing platform to do it. And every TEDx event is really different because they're all sort of individual. I did one at this place that is, they're really committed to quality, but they also are very local, and they want to hear local stories. They're willing to pull up people who may not be the most famous people in the world or the best speakers, and they're willing to like really pull them out because they have a really powerful story or message, which I think is amazing. And that's the intention of TED anyway. So yeah, look, I'm thankful for the experience. It was really cool. I feel like my message got through. I mean, I did a smaller TED talk, like they limited us to like 10 minutes.
Okay.
So my TED talk is around 10 minutes, 10 and a half minutes. So yeah, and it'll be out in about a month because they have quite a strict editing process, and
really?
they got to get approval by TED before they.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a big thing.
Awesome. Well, kudos on doing that. We will have to watch for that and make sure we link to it when it's posted.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Very good. Well, we are closing in here on about an hour of really good conversation. So I want to start winding us down just a little bit. So I have a couple of just like general kind of rapid fire type questions. So my first question, and this one actually just popped into my head. So, if we have any dudes who have made it through the whole episode here with us today, what might be some advice that you would give to men who want to be more supportive or really build up women within their organization or their spouse or their children, any of the above as the women in their life seek to follow their own dreams?
Yeah, look, I think that's so good because we can't do it by ourselves, right? We really need the men in our lives. And it's funny because my husband listens to my podcast all the time, which is very feminist, right? But I think, what men can do is be vocal about appreciating women's viewpoints, and not as masculine traits, but as the feminine traits, like our intuition, our ability to feel. Like emotions and feeling are so powerful in business, and really powerful in the psychology of understanding customers, which is why we're all in business. Mm-hmm. And I think, as men, they can, you can really start to appreciate and feel and value and voice how powerful women are in an organization, because we bring a lot to the table. And it's not to overrule men, or that, like both perspectives are so important. And if they were in balance, we wouldn't be having these kind of conversations. Mm-hmm. So I think, recognizing too, where are you valuing your partner or the women in your life? Like, where are you valuing them, and where are you devaluing them? Where do you make comments, or where are there things that you say that really sort of devalue their gifts, their contribution, what they bring to the world? Because I think, my poor husband, I school him all the time because he just, there's things he's not aware of, and he just says things. And so I'm like, hey, that doesn't feel very good, and here's what it feels like. And then he's like, oh my gosh, I've never even thought it from that point of view. And so I think it's recognizing, and maybe also being sort of aware of the privilege, because men don't realize, there was a lot of talk around the Wonder Woman movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because women have never seen that much space where there's no man on screen, like ever.
Yeah.
Right? Ever, the first, 20 minutes or 30 before a man came in, like we've never seen powerful women on screen like that without men in it. But men haven't even considered that, right?
My favorite tweet, and it went pretty viral, so I'm sure you've seen it, but it was like somebody posted, "Oh my gosh, is this what men feel like every time they go to see a superhero movie? Like, no wonder you want to take over the world. This is great."
Exactly. And I think, it's just that lack of awareness. So it's just being more aware of like how much easier it is to be a man in a business, in home, and, and recognizing that and just noticing that and it bringing more appreciation to that. I think that's really the way that men can also help and speak up. Like most men are in organizations where they've seen sexism, right? They've seen women mistreated. They've seen women talked over. And it's being brave enough and bold enough and powerful enough as a man to say, you know what, that doesn't feel good. That's not okay. And I think then we really start shifting things.
Yeah, that's it's interesting as you were talking. It reminded me of a conversation that I had with my husband once. So he's a salesman in the ag industry that I work with. So he holds a role very similar to a lot of the clients that I work with. And we've had conversations, right? Like sometimes it can be very hard to be a young professional going out to talk to clients or customers who have way more experience than us, right? So if he's 26, 27, going out to call on farmers who have been doing this for 50 years, like that can be really intimidating to be a young person in a very experienced industry. And just in passing comment, I said, now layer on the fact that you're a 26-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And he just kind of went, yep, that would be an added layer of challenge that I do not have right now. And I said, hey, I just appreciate that you recognize it and whatever. And so I think that's a really good point, is like just awareness is so important in even just starting the conversation.
Yep, I agree.
Awesome. So okay. So we've given some advice for any men that have hung with us this long. Thank you. Yes, to anybody who's listening. So I want to turn it back kind of to yourself. So the way I wrote this question was, if you could give your 22-year-old self any advice, what would it be? And I guess as I was writing it, there's all these, like, if, to your 16-year-old self or to your 18, like a teenager. But I almost feel like, at 21, 22, like you're graduating college and you're at this transition point from like, being kind of young to now it's like, oh crap, I'm an adult. Now what the heck do I do? And I don't know, for whatever reason, like that age to me was a big transition point. And so I'm just curious, at that age for you, what advice would you give yourself?
Look, definitely to trust and value yourself, right? And that's what I would give to every woman at any age, to be honest, because I think it is the thing that sabotages us when we stop trusting ourselves and when we stop valuing ourselves. And so many of the decisions we make at that age sometimes are going for things that really aren't necessarily us, but we think that's what we should do, or it's valuing someone else's opinion over our own, or valuing society's ideas over our own. So it's really like, stay true to yourself. Like that's the most important thing that you can do as a woman, and a man as well. Like that's, general. But I think staying true to yourself is so important, because we as women have a lot of messages out there that are telling us to deny our truth. And that is sabotaging and will lead in all kinds of directions that you're going to have to unwind later on.
Good. Love it. So, last question, and then we'll switch to where people can find you. And I'm not going to lie. If anybody listens to the Tim Ferriss podcast, I stole this question from that because it is one of my favorite questions that he asks. But the question is, what is the book or books that you tend to recommend most often?
Oh, it's such a hard question for me, because it's always about where I'm at any given moment, right? But I always tend to recommend internal books, because I think dealing with sort of our mindset and our internal stuff is far more effective and important than anything you could learn about structures or marketing or anything in your business. So I recommend a lot of Brene Brown's books. I mean, she's got amazing books on resilience and on, daring greatly and, on really stepping up. For women, I read a couple of books by a woman named Judith Dirk, who has this thing called Circle of Stones. And it's really about how we come back to ourselves as women. So it's on the very sort of feminist side of things, but it's just really talking about how we come back into ourselves as women, how we, utilize circles of women to recognize who we are. And I think those are really powerful as well.
Awesome. I have checked out Brene Brown books, but I will have to check out the other ones. That's a new one for me. So thank you for that. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Sonya, again, thank you for joining us. Where can people find you? Social media, website, podcast? Give us all the good stuff.
Fantastic. Look, you can always find mostly everything on my website, which is sonyastattman.com. And if you want to check out my podcast, it's theliberationlab.com, or you can find the Liberation Lab on iTunes as well. So those are the easiest way to find me. And of course, I'm all over social media as Sonya Stattman. So you can always check in, connect. I love connecting on social media.
Perfect. Love it. And we will make sure to link to all of those things in the show notes. So Sonya, thank you again for joining us at an early time on Saturday in Australia and a late time here on Friday in Michigan. And just really appreciate all of your thoughts and perspectives. So again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Great conversation.
Thanks for tuning in to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast. You can find the show notes and links to all the resources mentioned in this episode by heading over to markjeweltraining.com/podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we'd love it if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That's what helps us move up in the charts so that more people can find us and start their surviving to thriving journey. See you next week.